Good morning. Good day for a jog. So as a philosopher, my politics, my theology, my ideas in general, very often are hard to categorize. There are many issues on which I agree with Republicans and many of which I agree with Democrats here in the US. And there are many Catholic writers and saints with whom I wholly agree, many for which I partly agree. I don't know. God made me in such a way to think about deep things, right? The roots and the branches pour forth naturally from those roots. Other people focused on the branches and then the fruits can conform their thoughts to those branches and fruits that fit within a group. What has come to be called groupthink. Republicans do it, Democrats do it, and in fact, so many religious people do it too. But I'm starting to wonder why. Why indeed we are more and more conforming. It seemed through the 20th century, up through the 60s, and maybe even the whole way through to the 1990s, there was this movement towards spiritual awakening, something that could be considered progressive. And there's been serious regress since in the early 2000s, starting with things like the Patriot Act, No Child Left Behind, reducing schools to standardized tests, high stakes ones, and packaged curricula that reduce learning to arithmetic and reading and reduces science to science that has been done, religion to religion that's been done, philosophy to the history of philosophy, politics to the politics of possible, self-limiting, where so much of that history actually points to things that were impossible that changed. Well, I don't know. What do you think? What do you think on that? And of course, those spiritual seekers of the 60s and those enlightened 1990s post-hippies, you know, there's also a certain degree of gullibility in that. A gullibility that may not be there for today's regressives. You know, the ressourcement, maybe, I don't know, the reconquista, all of those things going on in religion that are not so much seeking wisdom for love of wisdom, but are seeking the history for the sake of preservation. Things which aren't bad, especially in that they protect us from the naivete that is so apparent, right? In spiritual enlightenment and mysticism. But, right? Is there a future that actually gets back to philosophy, the love of wisdom, rather than the love of what was known by Plato or by Aristotle, the love that was known by long dead scholars of wisdom who didn't get there by conserving, but by liberating? Is there a truth that we can seek that's liberatory while recognizing the benefit of conservation. So I guess the challenge then for a philosopher today, not one of those YouTube philosophers who are merely historians of philosophers, but someone who genuinely loves wisdom and creating new knowledge, is to make a bridge between where you're heading and where people are. So necessarily, since today's philosophy is so retrograde, stepping back into the retrograde, since today's politics is so divisive, finding things that are okay on both sides. Because if philosophy is going to be anything more than mental masturbation, it has to be something that reaches to others and makes sense to them. And that's been my challenge working in conferences and places and trying to explain my work to those scholars who were able to get higher ed jobs. And then just talking to everyday people and making sense of what I think to them. It can be trying. It can be trying for sure. But it can be done beyond denominations, beyond parties, beyond factions, but moving forward towards God, towards that great communion in actuality. So the challenge is for the philosopher to stay true to themselves. You know that using ed philosophy, right? You can change your opinions just a little bit, become a full empiricist, and find an empiricist department with your PhD to get a job. Or you can be a Deweyan and find a Deweyan department that welcomes you with open arms, or a full-on critical race theorist and nothing else, and find one of those departments to hire you. You can become a quantitative researcher, a qualitative researcher, or anything else, right? An objectivist, whatever that is, or a full-on subjectivist, and find a job. But truly, if you're a philosopher, you'll be limiting yourself to become one of those things fully, because nobody is. There can't be more than one truth. So it's really no surprise that YouTube Catholics, YouTube runners, YouTube philosophers have all reduced themselves to two-dimensional caricatures of themselves, is it?